Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be visiting Glasgow, Scotland, to look at the events of two bank robberies which took place in 1969. In December 1958, a young man by the name of Howard Wilson joined the City of Glasgow Police Department. He was 20 years old and over the next 10 years received 9 commendations before becoming the police custody officer at the Central Police Station. He was extremely ambitious, but after 10 years of service felt disillusioned with his career as he believed that he was always being overlooked for promotion. Wilson decided to resign from the police force and open a greengrocer's shop called The Orchard in Mount Florida, Glasgow. He lived in a flat in Allison Street in Govan Hill with his wife and young family. His greengrocer's shop was unsuccessful, and within a year, 31-year-old Wilson had accumulated a significant amount of debt. He became a member of the Bearsden Gun Club, and it was here that he met Ian Donaldson and John Sim. Donaldson was also 31 years old and was married with 3 young children. He worked as a car mechanic and, similar to Wilson, was struggling financially. Sim was 22 years old and had also previously been a policeman. However, after less than 2 years on the force, he had been asked to resign as he was not competent enough to become a police officer. Sim was married with a young child and had a hobby of collecting guns. With all 3 men struggling to make ends meet, they drunkenly decided over a game of cards to rob a bank. After they had sobered up, they still thought that their plan was a good one. They enlisted the help of a 4th man, 21-year-old Archibald McGeechy, to become their getaway driver. They decided upon their target, the British Linen Bank in Renfrewshire. At around 3:30 p.m. on 16th of July 1969, the men arrived at the bank. Smartly dressed, they disguised their faces and entered the bank. One of them was carrying a gun, whilst the others had small plastic containers which were filled with ammonia. They forced the manager to open the safe, where they grabbed around £20,000, the equivalent of around £350,000, or in US dollars $470,000, before fleeing the scene. Aware that any show of sudden wealth would draw suspicion to them, they spent the money discreetly, mainly to pay off their debts and meet their rent. The police launched an investigation, but little progress was made on the case. Just a few months later, the men were close to running out of money again. A new plan was established. This time they would rob the Clydesdale Bank in Linwood. It's about 15 miles from Glasgow. The getaway driver, McGeechy, did not want to be part of this robbery, and on the 23rd of December 1969, he disappeared and has never been seen or heard from again. 1 week later, on the 30th of December 1969, Wilson, Donaldson and Sim entered the bank in Bridge Street. Holding the bank staff and customers at gunpoint, the men forced the manager to open the bank's safe. Approximately £14,000 in notes and coins was placed into 2 suitcases and a black metal box, and the men then made their escape. They returned to Wilson's flat in Allison Street and unloaded the money, ready to each take their cut. Less than a minute away from the flat was the Craigie Street police station. 43-year-old Inspector Andrew Hislop and 36-year-old Police Constable John Sellers left the station that afternoon and became caught up in traffic on Allison Street. Inspector Hislop noticed the 3 men unloading the suitcases and box from their car. He was unaware that there had been a bank robbery that afternoon, but his suspicions were still raised. He had previously been responsible for inaugurating firearms training in the area, and Wilson had been one of his trainees. He was aware that Wilson had subsequently left the police force and suspected that the 3 men may have been handling stolen goods. Leaving PC Sellers to watch the flat, Inspector Hislop returned to the police station to request some help. accompanied by Detective Constables John Campbell and Angus Mckenzie and Police Constable Edward Barnett, he returned to the flat. They were greeted by Wilson, who was very cooperative and invited the policemen inside. However, Wilson's demeanour changed when Inspector Hislop opened one of the suitcases and found it to be full of money. Realising they had stumbled upon a much bigger crime than handling stolen goods, Inspector Hislop demanded to know the location of the black box, which he had witnessed the men carrying just minutes earlier. Wilson grabbed his gun and shot the inspector at close range, hitting him in the left side of his face. Inspector Hislop collapsed to the floor, still conscious but unable to move. Turning the gun on the other men, Wilson then shot both Detective Constable Mckenzie and Police Constable Barnett. Inspector Hislop could do nothing but watch. Meanwhile, wanting nothing to do with the violence, one of the other bank robbers, Donaldson, jumped out of the window and escaped. PC Sellers had managed to get away and hide in the bathroom and was able to use his radio to call for help. Wilson attempted to force his way into the bathroom but was unsuccessful. Wilson then realised that Inspector Hislop was not dead, moved away from the bathroom door and prepared to shoot him a second time. As he did so, DC Campbell rushed at Wilson, dragging him to the floor. A struggle followed, and despite Wilson's pleas for assistance, the other bank robber, Sim, sat paralysed with fear. With the help of PC Sellers, DC Campbell managed to wrestle the gun away from Wilson just as additional police officers arrived at the scene. Wilson and Sim were immediately arrested. At the time of his arrest, it is reported that Wilson asked to apologise to DC Mckenzie's wife June as he personally knew her. With the exception of this, he showed no remorse. Ian Donaldson was arrested shortly afterwards at his home. Detective Constable Angus Mckenzie died at the scene. Police Constable Edward Barnett died in the Victoria Hospital 5 days later, leaving behind his wife Margaret and their 2 children. Both DC Mckenzie and PC Barnett were posthumously awarded the Queen's Police Medal for gallantry and distinguished service. Inspector Hislop survived, but with substantial injuries. He was awarded a George Medal for his bravery. After a long period of recuperation, he returned to the police force, but had to resign in June 1971 due to the ongoing effects of his injuries. He died in November 2000 at the age of 74. The events of that day haunted him for the rest of his life. DC John Campbell was awarded the George Medal for his bravery, and PC John Sellers was awarded the Glasgow Corporation Medal. Wilson, Donaldson and Sim were all charged with 2 counts of murder, attempted murder and armed robbery. The murder and attempted murder charges against Sim and Donaldson were subsequently dropped when it was established that they had not participated in any part of the violent crimes. On 6th of February 1970, in Glasgow Court, Wilson's solicitor informed the court that Wilson wished to confess to all of the charges brought against him. It was the first time in Scottish history that anyone had pleaded guilty to a double murder. The 3 men were sentenced on the 13th of February 1970 at the High Court in Edinburgh. Donaldson and Sim were both sentenced to 12 years for their role in the bank robberies. Wilson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years. The death penalty in Scotland had been abolished just weeks before the events of 30th of December 1969, and these brutal murders led to many calls for it to be reinstated. During his time in prison, Wilson received an additional 6 years added to his sentence for brutal attacks on prison officers and his role in the Porterfield prison riots. On 30th of September 2002, at the age of 64, he was paroled under the terms of the European Convention for Human Rights. This came as a huge blow to the families and friends of the victims, along with police officers across the country, many of whom believed that he should remain in prison for the rest of his life. As of 2019, he was 81 years old and still living in Scotland. I've been unable to find any more up-to-date information. It is also rumoured, although not proven, that when McGeechee refused to take part in the second bank robbery and subsequently disappeared, Wilson may have killed him and buried his body in the concrete pillars of the Kingston Bridge, which was being built at the time. That concludes today's story on Howard Wilson. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any comments, please add them down below. And now it's time for Petty Crime. Today's petty criminal has been submitted by Janet Carr-Wharton, a Yorkshire lady that now lives in Scotland, a great contributor to the comments. Dear TCR, humbly submitting a wee story. The précis is this. Friend of a daughter found a stray cat in a field in middle of nowhere, southwest Scotland, where she stables her ponies. The cat was ill, so the lady took her to the vet, who got the fleas away, but the lady couldn't keep the cat, as the cat is blind, profoundly deaf, and struggling with results of previous injuries, such as broken legs. The cat goes to live with our daughter and family. She couldn't find a litter tray, so they put foil on the carpet, so that she could hear where she was walking. She missed the tray often, and will go down in family history for even going on the carpet cleaner. Was safe due to stair gates, but managed a few times in the warm sunshine in the backyard. Kit Kat was at least 19 years old when she went to sleep late July after a diagnosis of stomach cancer. She had only been ill for 24 hours. She's much loved by her family and now asleep in our garden, so she can sit on the wall and look over the fields. That's what her grandson says. So much for a précis. It's a blooming novel. If you're wondering about the bow on Kit Kat's head, it's because the family said she was the greatest gift. Thanks, Janet, for an amazing story. Now for the second part of today's story. We travelled to Northamptonshire in England. This is Vega, V-E-G-A. It's a one-dog crime wave and basically does what he likes, including stealing things and raiding bins. He's an 8-year-old Afghan hound who was imported from Germany. This has been sent in by Shark Fat. So his full name is Shark Fat RC Customs, and I think he probably has one of the best jobs in the world. He paints radio-controlled car bodies for a living. Way to go, Shark Fat, and thanks for introducing Vega to us. Thanks once again for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Whilst in prison, Howard Wilson wrote a novel called The Angels of Death. It was a fictional story based in New York of a man going on a rampage. Goodbye.